Before he became the Prince of Darkness, Ozzy Osbourne was just a young boy with a broken home and a dream to escape into the world of music. But there was one man, one voice, that changed his life forever. That voice was Elvis Presley. Imagine for a moment the rebellious spirit of rock and roll that transcends generations, a voice that echoes through the fabric of time, shaping the very sound of music for decades. What if the king of rock and roll could help shape the future of heavy metal? What if the very essence of Ozzy Osbourne's journey, his rise from tragedy to stardom, from chaos to clarity, was deeply intertwined with a legend who'd lived and died long before Ozzy ever took the stage? This story isn't just about the music. It's about transformation, about how one man's pursuit of freedom through song could ignite the flame in another, leading to the creation of a new genre, one that would revolutionize rock forever. Elvis Presley's influence on Ozzy Osbourne is a story few truly understand. It's a story of a lost boy in the streets of Birmingham, trying to make sense of a world filled with pain and confusion, but finding solace and guidance through the music of a man who never stopped fighting for his truth. It's a story of how the polished, mainstream image of Elvis Presley collided with the raw, gritty chaos of Ozzy's life, merging two worlds that seemed impossibly distant. Yet, Presley's spirit, his rebellious nature, his refusal to be tamed, sparked something in Ozzy, something that not only inspired Ozzy's music, but became the foundation for everything he would go on to achieve. You may look at Ozzy Osbourne's persona, his wild antics, his infamous stage presence, and assume that he comes from a world completely different from the one Elvis ruled. But that's where the story gets interesting. Ozzy's upbringing in a poor working-class family, his struggles with mental health, and the chaos that followed him through his early years, made Elvis's music not just an influence but a lifeline. When Ozzy discovered Presley's music, he didn't just hear melodies and lyrics. He heard a voice that spoke directly to the broken parts of him, parts that yearned for something greater. That was the turning point. The moment he realized that music, like Elvis's voice, could be the one thing that could save him from himself. This video will take you on a journey through Ozzy Osbourne's life, his trials, his triumphs, and the undeniable connection between him and Elvis Presley. Through interviews and stories shared by Ozzy himself, we'll dive deep into how Presley's music shaped the artist who would go on to change the face of rock music. This isn't just about two iconic musicians from different eras. This is about the power of music to transform lives, to heal, and to create legends. Ozzy Osbourne's early life was far from the rock star fantasy many imagine. Born in the gritty streets of Birmingham, England, in 1948, Ozzy's childhood was a world of hardship, filled with poverty, abuse, and confusion. His family struggled to make ends meet, and Ozzy was often caught in the turbulence of his parents' volatile relationship. As a child, he didn't have the comfort of stability or affection. Instead, he spent his days grappling with the chaos around him, feeling disconnected from his family, his peers, and even himself. But in the midst of this turmoil, Ozzy discovered something that would change everything for him: music. For many young people, music is simply an escape, a way to drown out the noise of the world. But for Ozzy, it was far more. Music became a lifeline, a way to reach beyond the brokenness of his own life and touch something greater. And it was in this search for meaning that he found Elvis Presley. Elvis, the king of rock and roll, was a beacon in a world that seemed determined to keep Ozzy in the shadows. The moment Ozzy first heard Elvis's music, it felt like the world had cracked open before him. There was something about the raw power in Elvis's voice, the reckless abandon in his performances, that spoke directly to Ozzy's soul. Presley wasn't just an entertainer to Ozzy. He was a symbol of freedom, rebellion, and escape. For a boy trapped in a world of pain and isolation, Elvis represented a possibility, the possibility of breaking free. Elvis Presley didn't just revolutionize music. He shattered barriers, race, class, societal norms, and created a space where artists like Ozzy could find their own voice. Ozzy, raised in a world that demanded conformity, saw in Elvis a man who didn't care about fitting in. Presley was a star, not because he played by the rules, but because he created his own. In interviews, Ozzy has spoken about how Elvis's unyielding individuality inspired him to embrace his own rebellious spirit. It was this essence of Elvis that would leave a mark on Ozzy's life, shaping not just his music, but his identity as an artist. But Ozzy's admiration for Elvis wasn't just about the music. It was about the way Elvis carried himself, the way he lived unapologetically. In interviews on MTV's Behind the Music and the Jimmy Kimmel Show, Ozzy has admitted that he wasn't trying to be the next Elvis. "I wasn't trying to be the next Elvis," he said, "but I was trying to be real, like him." And that's where the connection runs deep. Ozzy didn't see Elvis as an idol to imitate. He saw him as a guide, a figure who taught him that to be truly free, an artist must be willing to risk it all, to stand tall even when the world pushes back. Growing up, Ozzy wasn't surrounded by the luxuries that many of his peers took for granted. He was poor, often bullied, and found himself on the wrong side of authority figures. Music became his refuge, but it was the music of artists like Elvis that helped Ozzy begin to imagine a life beyond his circumstances. Through Elvis, Ozzy learned that music could be a rebellion, a way to challenge the world around you, to fight back against the pain and confusion. In those early years, Ozzy's life was full of emotional turmoil. His family life was fractured, his future uncertain, but music provided him with a sense of purpose, something to latch on to as he navigated the rough terrain of his adolescence. And when he heard Elvis, it was like a spark, a fire ignited inside of him, a fire that would burn through the darkness of his early life and propel him towards something greater than he could have ever imagined. Through his interviews, Ozzy has shared how music was his therapy. It wasn't just something he listened to, it was something he lived. He often describes how it was his way of numbing the pain, of escaping a reality that felt too overwhelming. And when he found Elvis, it was like finding a kindred spirit. Ozzy, like Elvis, wasn't looking to conform or fit into a mold. He was looking for authenticity, for something that would speak to his soul. And Elvis, in all his messy glory, gave him exactly that. In a world that seemed bent on breaking him, Ozzy found a way to fight back, and it wasn't just through his music. It was through embracing the lessons of rebellion, individuality, and authenticity that he learned from the king himself. The moment Ozzy first heard Elvis's music, he realized that music could be more than just sound. It could be a lifeline, a way to reach beyond the boundaries of the world he knew. As Ozzy Osbourne's journey in music began to take shape, the rebellious spark, ignited by Elvis Presley's influence, started to evolve into something more. In 1968, Ozzy, along with guitarist Tony Iommi, bassist Geezer Butler, and drummer Bill Ward, formed Black Sabbath, an unholy marriage of raw, aggressive sound and dark Gothic themes that would go on to change rock music forever. But despite the ominous tones of Black Sabbath's music, the spirit of Elvis Presley lingered, a constant reminder that Ozzy's artistic soul was rooted in something deeper, something that transcended the darkness of heavy metal. Black Sabbath's music was far from the polished mainstream appeal of Elvis's early rock and roll hits. Their sound was heavier, darker, a foreboding exploration of themes like death, fear, and the supernatural. But beneath the sonic chaos, there was an undeniable connection to the rebellious ethos that Elvis had embodied. Just as Elvis had used his voice to challenge societal norms and push boundaries, Ozzy was now using his music to confront his inner turmoil and the world around him. Ozzy's personal life, however, was in turmoil. The chaos of fame, coupled with his struggles with addiction, began to threaten the very core of Black Sabbath. Interviews from this period show Ozzy grappling with the duality of his life. On one hand, he was the lead singer of one of the most influential rock bands in the world, but on the other hand, he was spiraling out of control, battling demons that had been with him for years. Despite the mounting pressure, the spirit of rebellion that Ozzy had absorbed from Elvis continued to guide him through these turbulent years. "I wasn't trying to be the next Elvis," Ozzy has said, "but I was trying to be real, like him." This was the tension in Ozzy's life. He wasn't just an entertainer. He was trying to carve out a space for himself in a world that often felt suffocating. As the band's music grew heavier, Ozzy poured his struggles into his performances. His chaotic stage presence became legendary, with wild antics that would later define his persona. But beneath the madness was the same desire for authenticity that had driven Elvis to superstardom. As the 1970s wore on, Ozzy's battles with addiction and the pressures of fame became even more intense. The Black Sabbath album Paranoid 1970 featured tracks like Iron Man and Fairies Wear Boots, which addressed themes of alienation and self-doubt, two feelings Ozzy had come to know intimately. These songs were a cathartic release for Ozzy, a way to exorcise the demons that haunted him. But as the band rose to global fame, Ozzy's personal life began to spiral into chaos. The tension between his public persona and private struggles became unbearable, and his battle with addiction started to take a serious toll on his mental and physical health. Yet, through it all, Ozzy never lost sight of the lesson he learned from Elvis: to stay true to himself. As the music grew darker and more intense, Ozzy began to embrace the chaos. The more his life fell apart, the more he channeled his pain into his music. The spirit of rebellion that Elvis had championed was now fully alive within Ozzy, and it was reflected in every note, every scream, every wild performance. In his interviews, Ozzy often speaks of music as his escape, his therapy. He has acknowledged that the raw, visceral sound of Black Sabbath was an outlet for the anger and pain he felt inside. "The music was my way of getting out," he has said. It was as if every note was a battle cry, a way to shout back at the world that had dealt him such a cruel hand. And while Black Sabbath's music grew heavier, more intense, Ozzy found solace in knowing that he wasn't alone. He was part of a greater tradition, a tradition that began with artists like Elvis, who used their music to break free from the confines of their circumstances. But the tension continued to rise. Ozzy's personal struggles were becoming public knowledge, and his reputation as the Prince of Darkness began to overshadow his musical achievements. The fame he had once craved now felt like a curse. But Elvis's legacy was still with him, quietly guiding him through the darkness. It was a reminder that, no matter how far Ozzy fell, he could always pick himself up and keep going. Elvis had shown him that authenticity was more important than fame, and that, no matter what, an artist's true power comes from staying real. Ozzy's journey through this period wasn't just about fame or success, it was about survival. His music, influenced by the spirit of Elvis, became the one constant in a life filled with chaos. And through his struggles, he began to understand that music wasn't just an escape, it was a lifeline. The turning point in Ozzy Osbourne's journey came not through a new album, a chart-topping hit, or a moment of grand success. It came through a moment of vulnerability, an epiphany that forced him to confront not just his own struggles, but the very essence of who he was as an artist. It came during an intimate moment on MTV's Behind the Music, where Ozzy, in his characteristic raw honesty, reflected on the deep connection he had with Elvis Presley. It was there, on that stage of reflection, that Ozzy acknowledged something he had carried with him for years, but had never fully understood. Elvis Presley wasn't just an influence on his music. He was the foundation of Ozzy's very identity as an artist. "I wasn't trying to be the next Elvis," Ozzy confessed. his voice soft but unmistakably earnest. "But I was trying to be real, like him." Those words struck at the heart of everything Ozzy had been through: the pain, the rebellion, the chaos of his life. It wasn't just the music that had shaped him, it was the spirit of Elvis Presley's refusal to conform, his insistence on living his truth, no matter the cost. In that moment, Ozzy realized that his struggles with fame, addiction, and his personal demons weren't just random occurrences. They were part of a larger journey, a path paved by the very spirit of rebellion that Elvis had exemplified. The MTV Behind the Music special captured a pivotal moment in Ozzy's life, a man who had spent decades living in the shadows of his own chaos finally stepping into the light. It was here that Ozzy acknowledged something profound. He wasn't just the Prince of Darkness, he was a man who had been shaped by the same forces that had shaped Elvis Presley, a man who had fought for his authenticity, his individuality, and his freedom. For Ozzy, this realization was a turning point that allowed him to begin reconciling the wild persona he had cultivated with the deep-seated truth of who he was. In that moment of reflection, Ozzy found a sense of peace, a rare moment of clarity amid the storms that had raged around him for years. He understood now that the dark, chaotic elements of his music and persona weren't just a rebellion against the world. They were a reflection of the same rebellious spirit that had driven Elvis Presley to become the king of rock and roll. Ozzy's music, just like Elvis's, was a testament to the power of authenticity in a world that often tries to stifle it. Ozzy's acknowledgement of Presley's influence wasn't just an intellectual realization, it was a deeply emotional one. For years he had lived with the weight of his personal struggles, believing that they defined him. But in this moment, Ozzy understood that the essence of who he was as an artist, the raw, unapologetic power of his voice, the unrelenting energy of his performances, had its roots in something much older, much bigger than himself. It wasn't just about being a rock star, it was about carrying forward the legacy of a man who had changed the world with his voice, his courage, and his willingness to be real. This realization wasn't just a turning point in Ozzy's career, it was a turning point in his life. In that moment of reflection, Ozzy began to understand that his struggles had a purpose. His chaotic journey, his rise to fame and fall from grace, were all part of a larger story, a story that was still being written, and through it all, the music of Elvis Presley remained a guiding force, a reminder that, no matter how lost he had felt, there was always a way back to authenticity. In the aftermath of this revelation, Ozzy's approach to his music began to shift. No longer was he simply the chaotic, rebellious figure that fans had come to know and love. He was a man who had found clarity in his own journey, someone who understood that the true power of music came not from rebellion for rebellion's sake, but from the authenticity that comes with embracing one's true self, flaws and all. Ozzy in that moment had found his peace. His connection to the legacy of Elvis Presley was complete. As Ozzy Osbourne's career matured, the echo of Elvis Presley's influence never faded. Even as he faced the constant challenges of fame, addiction, and the public's unrelenting scrutiny, Presley's impact on his music and his life remained a steady force. Throughout his career, Ozzy continued to reflect on the lessons Elvis had imparted to him, the importance of staying true to oneself, the power of rebellion, and the necessity of living authentically, no matter the cost. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, Ozzy had established himself as a solo artist, having left Black Sabbath behind to pursue his own vision. Hits like Crazy Train and Mr. Crowley marked his transformation into one of rock's most enduring icons. Yet, even in the height of his solo career, Ozzy would often speak of Elvis with reverence, acknowledging the profound effect that the King of Rock had on shaping not just his sound but his sense of self as an artist. Despite his wild antics and larger-than-life persona, Ozzy had always understood that the true power of music lay in its authenticity. Elvis Presley's refusal to conform, his ability to pour his soul into his music, and his defiance of societal expectations had shown Ozzy that he could survive and thrive by staying true to his artistic vision. The more Ozzy grew as an artist, the more he realized how much of his success was due to his willingness to embrace the same spirit of rebellion that had once defined Elvis. Presley's legacy, it turned out, wasn't just about the music. It was about an ethos, an understanding that authenticity and rebellion could change the world. In interviews during the later years of his career, Ozzy continued to express his deep gratitude toward Presley. He would often tell stories of how he used to sit for hours listening to Elvis's records, studying the way Presley's voice seemed to carry the weight of the world, yet still managed to inspire joy and defiance. Ozzy saw in Elvis not just a musical influence but a reflection of his own journey, the struggles, the doubts, the relentless desire to break free. It was in these moments that Ozzy found his true connection to Presley, not as an idol to be imitated, but as a mentor, a guiding force that had helped him find his place in the world of rock and roll. As time passed, Ozzy's legacy grew, but he never lost sight of the man who had helped shape it. Even in his more reflective years, when he looked back on his tumultuous career, Elvis's influence remained a central theme. It wasn't just the music that Ozzy carried with him. It was the spirit of Elvis's rebellion, his insistence on being true to himself, and his unwavering belief that music could be a force for change. The cultural impact of Elvis Presley on Ozzy Osbourne's career is impossible to overstate. Presley not only shaped Ozzy's musical style, but also helped to shape the trajectory of rock music as a whole. The raw power and authenticity that Presley had brought to the world of music paved the way for artists like Ozzy to push boundaries, to question the norms, and to create something entirely new. Through his music, Presley had broken barriers, and in doing so, he had made it possible for Ozzy to do the same. What began as a personal connection between two men, one who had long since passed and one who was just beginning to carve his path, became the foundation of an entire genre. Ozzy's battles with addiction and his personal demons continued to challenge him. But as he looked back on his career, he saw how far he had come. He had become a living testament to the power of authenticity in music, a power that Elvis Presley had pioneered. The Prince of Darkness had not only survived the chaos of his own life, but had thrived, all while carrying the torch of rebellion that Presley had lit decades earlier. The lasting emotional consequences of Elvis's influence on Ozzy were clear. In many ways, Ozzy's evolution as an artist mirrored the evolution of rock music itself, raw, unfiltered, and unapologetically real. Just as Elvis had once redefined the boundaries of rock and roll, Ozzy had redefined what it meant to be a rock star. But in both cases, it all began with the same essential truth: to be truly great, an artist must remain true to who they are, no matter the cost. As Ozzy continued to reflect on his legacy, he understood that the journey he had embarked on, his rise from a broken childhood to the heights of rock stardom, was a journey that had been deeply influenced by the spirit of Elvis Presley. The lessons Presley had taught him, both through his music and his life, had been the guiding force that had helped Ozzy survive and thrive in a world that had often seemed determined to break him. In the end, the story of Ozzy Osbourne and Elvis Presley is not just about two men from different eras. It's about the power of music to transcend time, to bridge worlds, and to connect people across generations. It's about the way that one man's authenticity and rebellion can inspire another to live their truth, no matter the cost. And it's about how, through music, both Elvis and Ozzy have left an indelible mark on the world, a mark that will never fade. As we look back on Ozzy Osbourne's incredible journey, it's clear that his rise from the streets of Birmingham to the peak of rock and roll was not a solo endeavor. It was shaped, influenced, and guided by the spirit of another rock legend, Elvis Presley. While Ozzy's persona and music have often been seen as dark, chaotic, and rebellious, the truth is that they were born from the same rebellious energy that Elvis had harnessed so many years before. Ozzy's journey, filled with its own struggles, triumphs, and tragedies, was a direct reflection of the lessons he learned from the king. Elvis Presley taught Ozzy that authenticity was the key to success. Not fame, not conformity, but truth. And Ozzy, in his own way, carried this lesson throughout his career, using his music as a weapon to fight back against the pain, the addiction, and the chaos that surrounded him. Through every wild performance, every personal struggle, and every song he sang, Ozzy Osbourne remained true to the spirit of rebellion that Presley had embodied. But this story isn't just about Ozzy or Elvis. It's about the power of music to transform lives. It's about how the music of one man can reach across generations, across boundaries, and touch the lives of people in ways we may never fully understand. Music, as Elvis and Ozzy both proved, is more than just sound. It's a lifeline. It's a voice for the voiceless, a means of escape, a form of therapy, and most importantly, it's a way to be real in a world that often tries to force us to conform. So what does this mean for us? The listeners, the fans, and the dreamers. It means that the music we love, the artists we admire, have the power to shape not just the sound of a generation, but the hearts and minds of everyone who hears it. It reminds us that no matter where we come from, no matter what we're facing, we all have the ability to live authentically, to fight for our truth, and to